The reason we decided to have this conversation was that Guidon wrote a critical column in response to an interview that Omer did about the book with Haaretz, and so I thought we would discuss the criticisms in Omer's response and range beyond that as well. So Guidon, maybe you can just start by explaining what your critique was.
First of all, thank you to both of you, to you, Peter, and to you, Omer, that we have this really exciting opportunity to be all together and to talk to people who listen, because here in Israel, nobody listens anymore, for sure not to this kind of conversations and topics. I guess everything started from jealousy. I envy Omer. I envy Omer, first of all, for the title of his book, because all my life I wanted to write a book. What went wrong? Israel, what went wrong? And here he stole the title. Secondly, he's a year younger than me, exactly 1 year younger than me. And I all of a sudden found myself, when I read his very interesting interview in Haaretz, I felt myself that he's in the place that I was just 1 year ago. So it's only a gap of 1 year, and we'll stand together and there will be no argument between us. And there were 2 points that I tried to highlight reading his interview. The first one was that immediately in the beginning of his interview, he declares himself, I'm not an anti-Zionist. And so many times I did the same. Because for us, Omer and I were brought up in the same period, in the same Tel Aviv. His father was much more well-known than mine, but we both, I guess, got very similar indoctrination and maybe even brainwash, for sure brainwash. And for us to deny being a Zionist or reject Zionism is a very, very complicated, at least for me, a very complicated process. It took me years to say that I'm not Zionist, and then it took me many more years to say that even now I'm not sure I will answer differently than Omer, that I'm anti-Zionist. You have to understand, we get it with the milk of our mothers and with the air we breathe. You can't be in Israel, you can't be an anti-Zionist. You can't be. It's not legitimate. It's not acceptable. And it was just a few years ago when I realized that we are dealing with an ideology. And what's the problem to be in favor or against? So anyhow, I thought that Omar, I understood why he said, I can't say that I'm anti-Zionist. But throughout the whole article, he gave so many good arguments why everyone should be anti-Zionist. So I thought that it takes some more year, 1 year it takes, until he will admit that he's anti-Zionist, and it's very hard again. The second thing is deeper, I believe, because Omar's, and again, I must emphasize, I didn't read the book, I just read the interview. The book was not translated to Hebrew, and I didn't read English yet, looking forward. Throughout the whole interview, Omar speaks about the fact that something went wrong with Zionism. It started very good, promising, and something happened to Zionism, and it's not the Zionism that we knew before, or we thought we know before. And that's really an important point, because, again, a few years ago, I would answer the same answer. But getting deeper and deeper into the history and into the present, you realize that the beginning was wrong. It's not that something went wrong later. It was born with a sin, a very just cause of building here a national home for the Jewish people after the Holocaust started with a sin. In the 20s, Zionism spoke about conquering labor, which means taking over all the jobs from the Palestinians. This was the beginning. This was the attitude toward the Palestinians here, before the Holocaust, before anything. The attitude was a colonialistic attitude from the beginning. And the tragedy is that it never changed ever since then. I wish that Zionism would have changed throughout the years. It didn't. It's the same Zionism like then, and it was wrong then, and it is wrong now.
Okay, Omar, you're muted. Omar, is the
That's
problem
the reason he kept silent. That's the reason that he kept silent.
that you're just too young and too Israeli? Do you want to answer Omar's Gidon's claim first about the importance of the word anti-Zionist, and second about his claim that you think that Zionism was okay at one point and then went wrong?
Yeah, thanks. And hi, Gideon. The reason I kept silent is that I haven't lived for many years in Israel, so I actually wait for people to finish saying what they say. So let me respond to a couple of things about anti-Zionism. So, I obviously, as you read in the interview, and as I say, actually, the title of that interview, and as I say in the book, Zionism as a political ideology has to be discarded. It is a political ideology that has evolved in Israel into an ideology of racism, of Jewish supremacy, and an ideology that now justifies genocide. And no state that has such an ideology can remain a member of the international community while it maintains such a political ideology. So Zionism has to be discarded. There's no question about that at all in my mind. Now, of course, most Israelis, as you say rightly, are very far from that. In fact, I received a lot of criticism from self-described Israeli leftists who claim to be very much against Netanyahu, very much against all these policies, but very strong Zionists. So, what is the issue with anti-Zionism? I think of it this way. If Zionism, if the core argument of Zionism is that Jews, like any other group, have a right of self-determination, then I think we have to be consistent. I'm not a fan of nationalism. I've written a couple of books that are heavily critical of nationalism, and particularly of the kind of ethno-nationalism that is Zionism, and which Zionism borrowed from all the other ethno-nationalisms that existed around Jews in the late 19th century and led to the creation of Zionism. So I think nationalism is a really bad idea. Unfortunately, we live in a world of nations. And most of us would prefer not to be stateless because we know that being stateless is not a good condition to be in. So if you say that you're anti-Zionist, meaning you don't think the Jews have a right of self-determination, you have to be consistent. If Jews don't have that right, then nobody has that right. Then you actually claim that such a right does not exist. And certainly Palestinians would not have that right. Now, I don't subscribe to that. I think that Jews have that right and Palestinians have that right. The one right you don't have is to self-determine in a way that would oppress, remove other people. That is not a right that is given to you. But if as a group you want to self-determine, you're welcome to it. In that sense, I'm not an anti-Zionist. It'll be hard for me to be an anti-Zionist consistently so, because then I would have to deny self-determination to Palestinians as well. The kind of Zionism that developed, and that's the second question, how did it develop? That's a whole other matter because Zionism has become an ideology, and it is, as you say rightly, it's an ideology, it's not an identity, it's a particular political ideology. The way it has developed has become an ideology that is completely unsupportable. Now, what do I think about its development? As I write in the book, and I hope it will come out one day in Hebrew and it'll be easier for Israelis to read. And I have said publicly I'm happy to translate it, but I need a publisher and I haven't been able to find one yet. the way I describe Zionism is a movement that had two faces. You know, I know that Zionism began in the areas where most Jews lived. 80% of world Jewry lived in East Central Europe. And in the late 19th century, Jews came under increasing pressure through the rise of ethno-nationalism in the groups among which they lived, and through the rise of anti-Semitism. Again, a political ideology. Anti-Semitism, too, was a political ideology. And the Jewish question was created. It didn't exist before. And now there was a Jewish question. And the question was, what are Jews going to do? Now, vast numbers of them ended up going to North America. Large numbers of them tried to assimilate into the groups in which they lived. Many others became socialists and communists. And one answer to the Jewish question was Zionism, which initially was a small movement, not hardly the most popular. So Zionism claimed to provide an answer to the Jewish question. And that answer it took from the ethno-national movements in which Jews encountered, which created the Jewish problem or Jewish question in the first place. And it said, okay, we will also self-determine as a nation, but we can't be in the territories in which those other ethno-national movements exist, because they deny us that right, and we have no claim on those territories. And so it claimed that it would take that mythical, religious, historical, ancestral homeland of the Jews, Palestine, and there it would create another nation, another state, another entity where there would be a Jewish majority so that the Jews would no longer be a minority. That was the idea, that it would create a self-haven. And one has to say that especially after World War I, when there were large numbers of Jews beginning to come to Palestine, there was also growing persecution of Jews in Europe, and there were fewer and fewer places for them to go to. They couldn't go to the US anymore because the US passed its own racist laws in the early 1920s that blocked that path. And European countries increasingly did not want to take Jews in after the economic depression. And so hundreds of thousands of Jews came to Palestine, and one has to say that those hundreds of thousands of Jews who came there were spared the Holocaust. I don't know exactly about your family, Gidon, but I know about mine that both my mother's and my father's families, those who stayed behind, were all murdered. And I was born in Israel because my grandfather from Buchach decided to move to Palestine in 1935. Had he stayed there, I would not have been born because all those communities were completely murdered. So Zionism claimed to have provided that safe haven, and it was not a completely empty claim. At the same time, once the Jews came to Palestine, they started behaving like all other settler colonial movements. And Zionism never denied that. It colonized. It came to colonize. It built koloniot, moshavot. That's what they built. That's what they said. And yes, they took over Palestinian land, Palestinian labor. They created a dynamic of ethno-nationalism supported by the British Empire, the largest empire in the world at the time. And so it has these two faces. One, which was completely settler colonialist and created a conflict, refused to recognize the indigenous population that lived there, and to, over time, because there were, of course, elements in Zionism in the 20s and 30s that tried to find some other way. There were movements but they failed. And there was a second aspect of it, which was of providing a safe haven for Jews. That came to a head in 1948. And without going into all the details, after 1948, with the creation of the state, Zionism changes from being a movement that has these two faces of both rescue and safe haven, and an appeal to humanitarianism, to human rights, to liberation, to emancipation, to a state ideology. And that state ideology becomes an increasingly violent, militaristic, centralized, expansionist, and eventually, as we see after October 7th, genocidal ideology. And as such, of course, it has no right to continue existing.